Hey, glad that you're here today. Really glad you're here. If you're brand new, welcome, and I hope you feel right at home here at 2nd and 1111. Read an article a while back, really an interview with a Cambridge and Princeton scholar by the name of Dr. Paul Lim. And Dr. Lim teaches a very interesting course in a maximum security prison. So he has the students meet him there. They're not incarcerated. He has students meet him at this maximum security prison, and he teaches a course on prison writings and subversive spirituality. So what they do in this course is they look at different people who have been imprisoned, usually for their belief in God, their belief in Christ, and how did they navigate prison life with God. So they look at the writings of the Apostle Paul, obviously in the New Testament. They look at some of the writings of Fyodor Dostoevsky, and they also look at some of the writings of, say, Nelson Mandela. And it's interesting, this professor said that many times as he's taught the course, and he also ministers to people in this particular prison, he said, I feel like that many of the inmates have a deeper level of spirituality than the students that I'm teaching in the course. So it's like he's saying the people who are inside the walls of the prison have more freedom than the students that are outside those walls and live in what we call the free world. I find that interesting and fascinating on many levels. And I would suggest that one of the reasons this professor has discovered this phenomenon is because when you're in prison, you don't have what I call the two problem. T-O-O, the two problem. Now, there are all kinds of problems you have when you're in the joint, no doubt about it, okay? That's a whole nother message. But they don't have a two problem. In other words, a lot of us are simply too busy. We're just too busy. You know, years ago, I remember you ask someone, you call them up on the phone, and you know, you talk to them, you see them, you go, hey man, how's it going? How are you doing? And people would say, I'm fine. Now, they really weren't fine, but that was the correct answer. You ask people today, man, how are you doing? Man, I am busy. I am swamped. I am loaded. I am spinning so many plates. I am just grinding it out. I'm in the grind. I'm busy. And a lot of us are busy. We're too busy. We're too distracted. And most of us here, if not all of us, are also too tethered. We're too tethered to technology. We're way too tethered to our cell phone. We're way too tethered and connected to our social media feed. We're way too connected. We're overly connected. It's frightening. About a decade ago, I wrote a 23rd Psalm in dedication to technology, and this is what I wrote down. I put, technology is my shepherd, I shall not want. It makes me lie down in front of the big screen. It leads me with incessant noise. It makes me feel significant. And though I walk through the valley of no cell phone coverage, can you hear me now? You are with me. My iPhone, my Instagram, they comfort me. You text me and set wireless access before me in the presence of my family. You anoint my head with Bluetooth. My email overflows. Surely Facebook and Twitter will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the Google database forever and ever. I remember I wrote that for a book literally 10 years ago, and the guy that I was writing the book with said, now, who wrote that? Can you copyright that? And the publisher said, now, who wrote that thing about, I go, I wrote it. I really did write it. So I thought about that a lot. I thought about how technology is so intrusive to our lives. Now, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying we need to go on a farm in Pennsylvania and live and build barns, though that's not a bad idea for some of us. But we do need to achieve some modicum of balance from our over-connection to technology. So why might prisoners be more free than people who are not in prison? Maybe it's because we're too busy, we're too tethered. But underneath it all, a lot of times, we're just too afraid. We're too fearful of what might happen if we got still, if we got quiet, and really began to try to hear the call and the voice of God. So, what do we do? What do we do? How do we push back in this crazy, busy, technological culture that we live in? It's our reality. How do we push back? How do we press in a bit to still hear the voice of God? Well, some clues may be found in the story we're going to look at today in the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel is in the Old Testament. Go to the middle of the Bible, turn left. Samuel was an interesting guy. Samuel was a guy who was, the weight he had on his shoulders, the responsibility that this young man was going to have to carry, the battles he was going to have to fight, the complications, the difficult conversations he had to have, unbelievable, this guy named Samuel. And this story is a story that I heard many, many years ago when I was just a kid in Sunday school. And it's one of those intriguing stories. It's one of those haunting stories, but it's haunting, I think, in a positive way. Look at it. 1 Samuel chapter 3. It says, the boy Samuel was serving God under Eli's direction. This was a time when the revelation of God was rarely heard or seen. One night, Eli was sound asleep. His eyesight was very bad. He could hardly see. It was well before dawn, and the sanctuary lamp was still burning. Samuel was still in bed in the temple of God where the chest of God rested, the Ark of the Covenant. Then God called out, Samuel, Samuel. Samuel answered, yes, I'm here. And he ran to Eli saying, I heard you call. Here I am. Eli said, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. And so he did. God called again. Samuel, Samuel. Samuel got up, went to Eli. I heard you call. Here I am, present. Again, Eli said, son, I didn't call you. Go back to bed. This happened before Samuel knew God for himself. It was before the revelation of God had been given to him personally. God called again. Samuel, the third time. Yet again, Samuel got up and went to Eli. Yes, I heard you call me. Here I am. Let's pause right here in the story. It's kind of a quirky story, isn't it? It's interesting. I think it's telling about how God calls us and how God speaks to us. So one of the things I find fascinating about this part of the story is how God calls Samuel by name. He calls him by name. And when we look back at what we've been studying the past several months, we can see God speak to people by name. We can go back to Genesis. Remember Adam and Eve? They really messed up. They said, I'm going to live life my way. I don't need God to figure out reality. I don't need God to find satisfaction. I'm going to do my own thing my own way. And they really messed up, and they ushered in what we know as the fall. and then they start doing what a lot of us do. They hide from God. Do you ever do that? Sometimes I do that. I've done that. I'm gonna hide from God. We're gonna have these thoughts. I'm gonna keep these things secret from God. That's really stupid, isn't it? But Adam and Eve thought, hey, we're gonna hide from God, right? And what happened? God what? Called Adam. He said, Adam, Adam, where are you? Then remember we talked about Moses. Moses is one of the greatest leaders in the history of the world. Moses is on the lam. He's running away. He's out there working for his father-in-law. He's at work, and God calls him by name, Moses, Moses. And God spoke to Moses in that burning bush experience. Now we have Samuel, a young guy. He literally was living in the temple. His mom, Hannah, had dedicated him to be a Nazirite, just like Samson, dedicated to God. And now Samuel's asleep, I assume. He's in his bed. He's at a place of rest, and he hears this voice call him by name. Individually. As God's word said, it's a time when Samuel did not know God personally. You see, we've got to come to God ourselves. We've got to deal with God, in one sense, one-on-one. Your mom or dad can't do that for you. Your grandparents can't do that for you. We have to come to a point in time in our life where we respond to God's call in our life. That's what was happening to Samuel. I also find it interesting that Samuel found it difficult to discern the voice. He thought it was Eli. 3 times he thought it was Eli. He kept checking back and forth. It's Eli, it's Eli, it's Eli. We know, because we're kind of privy in this particular story, to know that it's really God. But Samuel doesn't know that yet. And sometimes it's difficult to discern God's voice, isn't it? I mean, is that God speaking to me? I don't mean he's speaking to you audibly, but is that God leading me? Is God calling out my name? Is God wooing me back to himself, back into a relationship with him? Is that God? Sometimes it's hard to tell, isn't it? Is that God? Or maybe I haven't slept for about 2 nights. Maybe it's that. Is that God, or is that I had too much pizza last night, or 3 cups of coffee? I'm kind of hyped up on caffeine. Is that God, or am I reading into this? So sometimes it's hard to hear and hard to discern. Is that really God, or is that my conscience, or is that what I ate, or because I haven't slept? So sometimes it's hard to discern God's voice. Samuel, young Samuel, was struggling there. So what happens next? What happens? God's called him 3 times. It's pretty wild, isn't it? 3 times he's called Samuel. Will he call again? Look at verse 9. That's when it dawned on Eli that God was calling the boy. Eli didn't get it either. So Eli directed Samuel, go back and lie down. And the voice calls again, say, speak, God. I'm your servant, ready to listen. Samuel returned to his bed, and then God came and stood before him exactly as before, calling out, this is the 4th time, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, speak. I'm your servant, ready to listen. Speak. I'm your servant, ready to listen. Speak. God, I'm yours. I'm open. I'm ready to listen. It's critical that we learn to hear and to respond to God's callings in our life. It was critical for Samuel because God had a big task for him to do. A big task. I mean, right after this, God was going to tell Samuel, you need to confront your mentor, Eli, and tell him that what he's doing and what he's doing with his family is out of order. God was calling him right out of the chute to have a very difficult, confrontational conversation. Then God was going to call Samuel to anoint and to choose the very first king of Israel, Saul. And then he would eventually choose the second king, his successor, King David. And then in his life, as it would play out, God would call Samuel to lead his people in a battle, in a war. And then Samuel would also be called to raise up the future generation of leaders. And he accomplished all of those tasks. How did he do that? Well, he learned at a very young age to hear, to know, and to respond to the call and the voice of God. In the midst of our crazy, busy, too tethered to technology society that you and I all live in, it is imperative that we learn to know and to hear and to respond to the voice and call of God. I think about Jesus, the story of Jesus. Jesus only had 3 years. Have you ever thought about that? Jesus had 3 years. The career that he led, the task that he accomplished, he did it in 3 years. And I don't know where you are with God and with Jesus right now, what you believe, but look at Jesus from simply a non-religious perspective. He's the most influential person that's ever walked planet Earth. He has over, more than Justin Bieber. I think he has over 2 billion followers, okay? So just from a non-religious perspective, you got to say, wow, what happened there in 3 years? Some 2,000 years ago that has literally set this world on fire. That's quite amazing in 3 years. And in these 3 years, we have some recordings about what happened, We have recordings primarily in the Bible, but also outside the Bible. And we know that in that 3-year time period, that many times Jesus himself would withdraw from the busyness of society. He would withdraw from the noise of the crowds. He would withdraw from all the many needs and people that were pulling to him. He would do that to get alone in order to hear the Father's voice. You just don't see Jesus in a hurry. The records we have with him. Again, he only has 3 years to change the world, right? It's a pretty big task. I know you're important. I know you're busy. I'm busy. I'm important. I think his task was a little more important than ours, maybe. And he would withdraw. And he would get alone. And he would get quiet to hear the Father's voice, to respond to God. You don't see Jesus in a hurry. Like, my goodness, I've got a really crazy busy day today. I've got a healing at 7 a.m. I've got to cast some demons out at 6. Then I got a budget planning committee with Judas. I've got anger management with Peter. I'm in a hurry. You don't see that. You don't see it. Jesus seems to be really resolute, purpose-driven, deliberate, intentional in the way he ordered his life. But many times we find him in a lonely place, in a solitary place, to hear no and to respond to the voice of the Father. Blaise Pascal, brilliant philosopher, mathematician, scientist, he said this. He said, the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he doesn't know how to stay quietly alone in his room. The sole cause of our unhappiness, our restlessness, our anxiety is its inability to be still. So what do we need to do? Well, I think we need to slow down. To the best we can, we need to slow down. Slow down our pace, make space to hear God. What else we need to do? We need to turn down the volume, the noise. Disconnect from our phone, disconnect from our computer, disconnect from our binge watching Netflix, no matter how good it is. Just disconnect for a moment. And then we need to do what Samuel did. Listen up. Listen up. God, here I am. I want to hear your voice. I'm ready and willing to respond. But to do that, you and I have to do something that has become radical in our world today. And you know what that is? That wasn't even a minute. About 47 seconds. What do we have to do in this crazy, busy, non-incarcerated world that we live in? Slow down. Turn down the volume. And listen up. Say, God, I'm yours. Speak. I'm ready to listen. Pray with me. God, we thank you that we have this place to gather today. We thank you that you know You know us all individually, God. You know our pains, our stressors. You know our doubts. You also know our joys, our celebrations, God. You know us all individually. And God, I know that no matter where we are emotionally this morning and this week and in this season of life, God, I know that we need to carve out those moments in our week, to put that in our schedule, to put that on our task list of things to do. Carve out some time to be still so that we might hear your voice and respond to what you're telling us to do. God, thank you. Thank you for speaking to us today. Thank you for Samuel. Thank you for his willingness to hear and to respond and to take a stand in the difficult world that he lived in. God, help us to do that. Help us to do that. Even today, even this week. This is our prayer.